quickly. My name is Jem. I'm the founder of Slash, and my co-founder Nick here. Not to put him on the spot, it's his big 3-0 today, so happy birthday. Sorry. So Slash is a smart keyboard, and our ambition is to change the way that you search and share information on your mobile phones. We want to show you a quick demo, and it's much easier to see it when to understand. And then I'm going to pass the torch to Nick, and we're going to talk about how we think around notifications and the future of notifications in the keyboard.
Cool. So this is, you're going to have to forgive this app preview here, but quick 30-second overview of the app. So you get the idea. Slash is a smart keyboard that makes it super easy to share anything from your keyboard without leaving the conversation. So we solve this problem of rapidly sharing information in two ways. One is through the slash command. So this is sort of a continuation of a tradition started in IRC, slash SoundCloud, slash Spotify, slash contacts, slash Giphy, shout out to Giphy. But the area that I actually wanted to highlight for the purpose of this conversation is what we call smart actions. So tapping slash is cool, that's an explicit action. But one of the things that we're trying to achieve with slash that you saw in that demo quite rapidly is this inline intelligence layer. So if you think about the history of text prediction, if you go back to T9, typing numbers turning into words. Shout out to T9, yeah. From T9, we improved autocorrect, autocomplete, and most recently, QuickType. And when you think about what QuickType achieves, and QuickType is, I might have finished with the video, but QuickType is those 3 words that sit on top of your keyboard as you're typing. And when you think about that, that's actually a form of notification, right? That's a notification layer that exists inside the keyboard. At a very high level, a notification is a trigger that happens at the time you have a belief that the person is properly able and properly motivated to execute the action. And so if I'm misspelling a word or I'm about to spell a word, that little strip of real estate right there is a notification layer that exists inside the keyboard. And so what we're really excited about with Slash, and love to talk to you guys after about, is kind of the next evolution of prediction in that text layer, which is what we call smart actions. And so what you saw there was one instance, which is a deep integration with the Foursquare API, where if I say, let's grab a drink, let's grab coffee, let's grab pizza, instead of suggesting just a word, we're actually suggesting an action, right? Words are means to an idea. What is the idea behind our words? Let's grab coffee. Well, Rafa is around the corner, right? And so happy to show you guys a proper demo of it in the future, but what we're really excited about is sort of trying to solve the notification problem in a completely new place, and do it inline, and do it in a tradition where actually we can have a pretty low level of confidence. Maybe we're right 25% of the time, maybe we're right 30% of the time, but it's so unobtrusive that it's actually like a welcome sort of suggestion that disappears if you don't want it and drills into a location if you do. Thanks.
Okay, so the next panel we're going to do is we got John Steinberg. John is an old friend who was president of BuzzFeed and now is at the Daily Mail, my favorite newspaper growing up, and now the world's favorite tabloid. And Andrew Mclaughlin, who's a betaworks partner and is CEO of Dig. And Alex Danco, who I read an awesome blog post that Alex wrote. And so Alex and I started messaging back and forth, and he said, hey, I'd love to come.
All right.
Hey, so can I start with a question?
Sure.
So one of the
I'm glad you are, because for a second I thought maybe I was supposed to come up with the questions.
it's like you're the moderator, right? You prepped. So one of the sort of dividing lines that I've seen hypothesized about notifications is that information is one thing and experiences are another. So for example, if you want to play Monument Valley, the notifications layer could not be more useless to you. You want to like go into the app, have the experience take over the screen and get into it. You could maybe even put things like Google Earth or Street View in that category. But in the media world, most of what we're doing is providing information in real time in a contextual way, at least through the notifications layer. So it's a little hard to do a discovery experience in notifications, but if what you want to do is just kind of like surface the right thing at the right moment, it's sort of optimal for that. On the other hand, I think an increasing amount of what your company is working on is experiences. It's not just kind of like real-time information. Some people think of it as kind of like the evolution of rich media on mobile, but do you buy that distinction? Does that make sense to you? Do you think about notifications as a way to get in front of people at the right moment? And then I'm going to ask you about your sort of thesis in your piece about ambiguity. But let me start with John.
I think my personal view is that notifications in news are incredibly complicated because for breaking news, basically everybody has it within seconds of each other and they're all trying to push it out, which results in multiple alerts with the same thing. And alerts really only tend to work, I think, in the case of an exclusive that you know that the reader cares about, or some case where you've created sort of the canonical story, almost like what TechMeme does or Nuzzle does around a major topic, in which case it may not actually be the fastest. Nuzzle will often send you kind of the definitive story hours after kind of one of the first breaks of the story has actually happened. Another interesting thing I thought about when I was coming on to this panel is I've worked with two people that I think are exceptional in editorial, Jonah and Martin Clark, and well, Jonah before Ben Smith, but Ben Smith as well. And both of them were very hesitant around notifications. And when a lot of media companies were jumping into push and notifications, they were very sort of user loving and concerned about they couldn't really think of how to provide the value to the user. And I think that was smart. I think that most media companies that rushed into the first set of notifications upset the users and provided very little value. So, it's all a long way of saying that I think less has tended to be more, at least in the media companies I've been involved with.
Do you have an editor-in-chief for notifications? Like how many people at your company can pull the trigger on a notification and to whom?
Well, interestingly enough, we don't, in the Daily Mail app, we don't have notifications right now. I mean, it's been one of these things where I think it's been kind of an effort to get it right as opposed to get it first. What's interesting about the Daily Mail app is we have so many people who say to me, oh, I'm in your app 10 times a day. And I wonder if the notification for media might be kind of repeat visitation and recency of articles. We do 800 stories a day. Actually, in some days this past month, it's been as high as 1,000 or 1,100. When you come back to our site, you're always going to get the most important breaking story, if there in fact is a breaking story, or news stories. What's interesting is Sam Lesson a long time ago said something about how everybody has a stutter step in their online behavior. And it was a sort of throwaway thing he wrote online, and it really stuck with me. And he had mentioned at the time that his was TechMeme. Mine also happens to be TechMeme. I think a lot of people with media consumption have a site where when they're between tasks or they get in a taxi, they just pull it up. It may also be Instagram or something like that as well. So it sort of obfuscates the need for a notification in a lot of ways. Loyalty removes the need for the notification.
It's interesting. We went for a long period at Dig being skittish about notifications and then went whole hog on them. And you mentioned Nuzzle. I'm always sort of bemused by Nuzzle because we've had this thing called News.me, which was the sort of predecessor to Dig, and we've baked it back into the new Dig app. And it's just, it's like the 10 stories that your friends have most tweeted, liked, retweeted, or whatever in the last day. And when we flipped on notifications for that, we found that it actually worked pretty well. You either want that or you don't. You're either in the flow of the day's news and you want to know at the moment that your Twitter feed is producing kind of like a winner story, like one that everybody's talking about, your friends are talking about, and like you want that in front of you. On the other hand, when you're not in that flow, it's pretty annoying. It's pretty irritating. And I've noticed myself kind of like flipping between that. It's not even necessarily like weekdays, weekends.
Although the Nuzzle algorithm, I think is pretty simple. If a lot of your friends tweet it, you get the Nuzzle alert, right? And I can't remember ever getting a Nuzzle alert where I didn't want to read the story. It almost has 100% hit rate. And like, all things in life, if it's simple, it tends to work better, right?
Yeah, that's exactly the way that News.me works, right? Or now the Dig Alert. In fact, it's interesting because that team, when they were in sort of the skunkworks mode, did 43 different algorithms to try to figure out how to do it, and literally just tweeting like treating every tweet, retweet like as a single +1, and then setting a threshold of like n, which is probably around 10 for most heavy users. That worked better than anything else, amusingly.
Yeah.
But anyway, Alex, you posited this other way to think about notifications, which is as a resolver of ambiguity. And I have to say that I've wrestled with that because it doesn't make any sense in the way that I think about notifications. And I thought maybe you could expand on it a little bit.
Absolutely. I think this is particularly relevant in the context of news as it comes at you, and whether it's relevant to your life or not, and whether you care. And I started thinking about this coming at the perspective of, I went and asked a bunch of people, what's important to you in a notification, and what are they, and what do they do? And a lot of people talked about this notion of contextual relevance, or how smart are they, or how much are they fitting with exactly what I want to see right now. And of course, we've worked on this a lot. Like, there have been a lot of solutions to what's the right thing to show you that are, a lot of them are social based, right? Like, I'm more likely to click on something if it comes from my friend Jen, whom I know posts smart things, than my friend Josh, who maybe less so. Sorry, Josh, I'm just kidding if you're watching. That being said, though, I found that you can put a very large amount of these incoming informations or streams of notifications at someone, and they can be not a problem at all in a particular situation, which is when there's no ambiguity to resolve. So for instance, like, suppose everyone's had this experience where they are sitting at their laptop and they're working, and they might get some sort of like a Chrome push notification or something that might be related to news, or let's say tweets are coming in. And you can see them right there. You know that either you are interested in them or they're not. But even if you're not, there is no moment at which you are unsure as to whether you have to care. And this is where this idea behind ambiguity resolution came from, which is that how relevant a notification or a piece of incoming news or media might be to me runs orthogonal to how much ambiguity there is as to whether I care or not. I would argue that these aren't necessarily opposite things, but they run across each other like this. And again, so we've had this experience where if you are in your phone already and a notifications drops down from Expedia advertising a 30% off sale, like, this may be the least relevant thing to me right now, but it's unambiguously clear that I can just swipe it away, and it barely interrupts me. The difference where that Expedia notification gets very annoying is when I get a buzz in my pocket and I don't know what it is. That's where you have to break your concentration, stop what you're doing, go check out whether or not this is actually something that you need to deal with, and then when in fact it's not, that's very annoying. It pisses you off.
I think the ambiguity thing is really profound, and I really liked your essay, because when you get that Expedia notification, it's so clear what you need to do. You need to turn off whatever is generating that, right? You don't want that, right? What's very difficult to deal with is when you get an alert, which is just a broken system. So Gmail on the Apple Watch, that's a broken thing. They're deliberately not piping through the ability to see enough of the message, because I guess they want you to get an Android watch or something, right?
Or they want you to get back into the phone.
Oh, right, exactly. So that, to me, they're almost two totally separate cases. To your point about the inundation of alerts, I got it. I was curious what Data Miner was like, and every media professional I've talked to absolutely loves Data Miner, right? As a human being, though, that's not a professional, it's unusable. There's just so much. So the question also is the professional alert level. If you're a trader, if you're a writer of breaking news, and then if you're a normal news consumer. And for the most part, these breaking stories tend not that many people need a partial breaking news story that leaves you not able to do anything, because, to your point, all it generates is ambiguity around the story.
I'll just say, maybe I'm just using different words for the same thing, but ambiguity does nothing to me to explain what's a good notification and a bad one. My phone buzzing when I don't know what it is always ambiguous, because a whole bunch of things get junked into that action.
Yes.
So it's always ambiguous. And a bad Expedia 30% off sale alert is not ambiguously bad. It's just bad because it's not relevant.
I can make it very easy, okay? If we get an alert now, board decision, Jack Dorsey, and then ... right? Like, because it's cropped off either technically or it's a link bait headline, right? That's an ambiguous notification. A notification which says Jack Dorsey named in 4-3 vote next CEO of Twitter. I mean, that's the opposite of ambiguous. And I think that so many of the news alerts tend to be these ambiguous partial stories. One of the things that the Daily Mail does, I think very well, is it's a giant homepage with a ton of stories, with headlines that basically give the whole story in most cases. We have 1 million visits in the U.S. alone where people come to the homepage, and I think it's because you can get so much of the story, and we want you to read some of the stories, but you also get a lot of detail on the stories that you don't even read. The entire homepage sort of acts as, I think, a notification layer. And I think, back to my earlier point, that's why you can direct navigate or go to the app and basically achieve, it's almost the reverse of that like push thing that Dennis put up a bit ago.
Okay, so I'm really glad that you
It's
brought
like
that up.
fetch, basically.
The idea of sort of clickbaity headlines that may be ambiguous. And this is actually, we can go in this direction if we want. This is where I'm a little bit cautious or concerned about where media is concerned, especially with advertising and the need to get attention, is the fact that it is well known that if you present a headline that has an ambiguity component that makes you want to click on it, it's going to work. We've all seen, 5 reasons why you should read X, you won't believe number 3. It's because it puts it right out there.
But it only works once.
It only works once.
This is the thing about the link bait thing. It only works once. And the people who say, like, oh, all of these sites are using these link bait techniques, that assumes it's a one-shot game. In a multi-shot game, the curiosity gap works once, and then people are like, well, I'm never going to click a link from that site again, assuming that they know on Facebook what the actual site is.
Does it only work once?
I think sites quickly. I think sites quickly gain a reputation, and I think that sites using the curiosity gap tend not to succeed in the long haul.
Sure.
All right, let me throw out a sort of a hypothesis and have you react to it. So, one of the things I think is interesting about notifications is that, and actually today I've been listening for anybody mentioning email. We've heard that very little today, but the primary notifications layer of kind of pre-mobile internet was email, and actually it's persisted as an enormously powerful notifications tool. It's been interesting to watch, email clients, in particular web-based services like Gmail, come up with ways to line up in almost TweetDeck style, the different sources of notification that you might be getting through email. But one of the things that it really suffered from was that kind of tragedy of the commons where, you have very little ability to block or deflect incoming notifications through email. More responsible commercial sites will let you unsubscribe, but, the rest is basically spam. So anyway, the notifications layer on a mobile device benefits from a lot more controls, right? So it's, in a way, becoming more responsive, sort of each version of iOS and each new iteration of Android, to allow you to do that. And then, as we've been talking about a lot today, to add in different kinds of functionality. One of the things that I heard earlier today, which is something which could never have existed for email, but is quite powerful on a mobile device, and which I'm kind of excited about, but annoyed that it's not there yet, are libraries of capabilities and services at the OS layer that would allow much better, precise targeting of information, the aggregation of location data points, for example, and then the extrapolation could be done by the app. But right now, kind of every app is trying to figure out, other than just exercising editorial judgment and pulling the trigger or not on given events, are trying to figure out, for themselves, how do I understand something about user behavior and then modulate the notifications that I'm sending out accordingly. It would be really nice if some of that were abstracted into the layer of the OS so that we could just build on it. What do you think?
Well, I'm really glad you brought up email, because the moment where we're at right now with notifications and media reminds me a lot of where we were with email about 20 years ago, where, in 1995 or so, email was up and working. It was a thing, and it worked pretty well because we weren't, maybe I'm getting my years wrong, we weren't yet getting this tidal wave of email from people who are trying to reach us. But then there was a point where, marketers and companies and people realized that email is actually a very good way to get in touch with people. So you added money to the system, right? You had a system that was at equilibrium, and then you dumped a whole bunch of money in. So what happened? Well, we adapted. And a lot of people, if you had asked them at the time, they said, how do you want to fix this? They said, oh, we want smarter email. Well, we didn't exactly get that. We did get email that's a little smarter. Like you said, you have TweetDeck style Gmail, and things like that. We did get better spam filters. That was great. But I think some of the more interesting changes that you saw were actually human adaptable components of this system. You saw people get multiple email addresses, one for junk, one for companies, one for personal, one for whatever, right? That's not an ideal solution for anyone, but it's the solution that emerged. And I think that's really interesting. So if we apply that lesson right now and say, all right, we're in a very similar situation because right now we are about to see a lot of ad money shift over from TV onto mobile devices because that's where our attention is. And if you think that we have a lot of ads now, just wait 5 years. And again, we have a similar situation where a lot of money is about to be dumped into the ecosystem. So how are we going to respond? A lot of people are saying, oh, well, I just want smarter notifications. It's like, well, that might be a little bit like saying I want smarter email 20 years ago. Like, we might not get it. We're probably going to figure it out in a different way.
I mean, Andrew, I guess what you're asking about kind of the personalization.
Can we avoid the tragedy of the comments on mobile devices? Are there baked-in features that would allow us to?
I think you're right, and I've thought a lot about this actually. And you know, the issue with being a news or a media company now is how much you have to do relative to the prior generation. So you take someone who I admire and like Jeff Zucker at CNN. He spends all day long trying to do great content. If he does great content, he gets the affiliate fees. The ad sales sort of takes care of itself. It all sort of happens. In this business, you've got to make the news. You've got to build the CMS. You've got to sell the ads. You've got to do the targeting. You've got to do the personalization. And I think the hope is that some of that will come to resemble a model more like cable. And I think the things that we see out there now is, could instant articles do that? My view on instant articles is that the revenue to a publisher should exceed what they see on programmatic. If Facebook has a CPM, on FBX that I don't know is $4 or $6 or something like that, and they take their 30% cut, at that volume of yield, we should be able to beat in many cases other programmatic CPMs we're getting. Apple News is sort of the same thing. I mean, the layer you're really talking about, if Apple News or Facebook or one of these things ends up being good, I think it could solve a lot of that, or they could be nothing. I hope they're good because it would remove some of the labor, I think.
I mean, it's interesting, just thinking about sort of like the sort of human engineering workaround for the email era was, you have a bunch of different accounts, or at least it was one that a lot of people used. And one of the things that people talked about earlier today was, these kind of like e-ink layers that you could maybe have on the back of a phone where you could actually like have the equivalent of a different, TweetDeck column or something like that for notifications. And I've noticed Slack trying to figure out, basically like how to make sense out of this universe of communications. And so far anyway, in my judgment, like failing comprehensively when it comes to notifications. One of the worst notifications environments I've ever been around. It's rendered it almost useless to me for meaningful real-time conversations because an @channel to everybody doing tech is exactly the same as the receptionist down here telling me that I have a meeting, and so I ignore them all. And so it's an example though where what I'm interested in is, you can call it personalization, but it's really like a level of sophistication about what I'm looking for that the apps can just build on top of. So Slack can build on top of that because the mobile phone makes that possible. It can aggregate data points from location and from my contacts database, from images and photos that I've captured, from accounts that I'm logged into and so forth, and pull that all together. And until that happens, I feel like we're sort of doomed.
I read that article that I think Benedict Evans or somebody wrote about WeChat effectively, I think, does that in China, right? And then, Dennis's comment or Scoble's comment about, SMS messaging. It's funny, being back here, I was hanging out with John back here, 6 years ago, and I recall how much easier life was then, right? You know what I mean? Like, we all had Twitter. We were all starting to play with Twitter. We had SMS turned on for the people that we really cared about. Phone calls used to work, right? And that was a joke, It was better. I mean, part of it was there was less influx, but actually more of it went through the SMS layer. I mean, seeing Dennis here talk about dodgeball and stuff like that, I remember when V1 of Foursquare was tied into SMS. Couldn't you get SMS alerts from the people you liked the best and stuff? So it actually was all better back in the good old days.
So the Daily Mail is a really interesting example. You got 800 stories a day, right? So the need for a personalized funnel is pretty stark, right? I mean, like very few people are probably going to crawl through all those stories.
What's actually amazing about it is personalization is really not that big of a thing in news. It really isn't. And I learned it first from Jonah, and then I've learned it now from Martin as well, is most people in the major news stuff, not in the specified interest type stuff, but in the big breaking news stories and in the big celebrity stories, the mass appeal, everybody wants to know, what are the big stories? What is on CNN right now? What's on the homepage of the Daily Mail right now? So the more personalization you do, you remove an element of like, I know if I go to the homepage of BuzzFeed, I find out what's big in culture. I know if I go to the homepage of Daily Mail, I know what is the biggest breaking news story and the biggest celeb story.
Do either of you get I don't know, New York Times alerts or notifications?
Like a Wall Street Journal, New York Times, yeah.
And so what's your, as a consumer of those products, what's your take? Like, why isn't the Daily Mail doing that?
I mean, to the point I began with, I think fundamentally they don't work. I think people know that when they want to know what's going on in the world, if they go to our homepage, we will be the first to have it, and we will tell them, in a very direct way, probably even in the headline with a picture right there. There are few major breaking news stories that are of appeal to the entire world that really deserve a push alert. Someone wins a presidential election, something that is a tragedy that everybody needs to know about right now. But they're few and far between, and everybody is doing the same one. So if we pushed it, it'd be the same one that the New York Times pushed or the Wall Street Journal pushed, and that's already causing a problem, I think.
So why is the solution to have another place that can bundle it together if people are already getting all of them?
I don't think it necessarily is for news. I mean, I have so many people who say to me, people who like our site, who say to me, oh my God, I'm on the Daily Mail all day long. And I think our task is to create that kind of loyalty for a group. And I think that the New York Times has to do the same. And I think that that is the media equivalent of the notification in most cases.
Well, one thing about media properties is if you look at what's changed between newspapers a few decades ago versus now, is you saw this big split where a couple of newspapers like the New York Times and Financial Times became destination sites where people would actually go to.
Yeah.
Whereas not too many people outside of Cleveland are going to go to the Cleveland Plain Dealer website.
Right.
It's just doesn't have that kind of destination clout. And now, but that's still in a pull internet, in an internet where you are pulling things. If I go to New York Times, I'm pulling from them. And as we move more and more towards push, do you think this is something where those destination websites are going to have more clout pushing things at you, or is it actually going to level that playing field?
Well, I think it's largely stayed the same for large national and global players and become increasingly difficult for small and regional players for a variety of other reasons. I mean, scale is not the local player's friend, right? I mean, it's equally difficult to run a $50 campaign as it is to run a $50,000 campaign, and a small paper can do that as readily or not on their site as a large national player. So the distinction between kind of the economies of scale to being local versus national or global, when you don't require printing actual paper, sort of goes away. I mean, that's fundamentally the problem with local, I think.
But if something like Daily Mail is doing the aggregating, and you guys are the ones who are actually spending time thinking about how to push this at people, and if you see an article that is in the Cleveland Plain Dealer that is actually you think will be very interesting, we don't
actually aggregate. I mean, this is kind of a misnomer that the Huffington Post has as well too. We have hundreds of full-time reporters and writers. Do we source other sources? We buy AP, we buy Getty, we buy Reuters, we buy everything, we buy all the images. We ingest 10,000 images a day, of which 1,000 images, we ingest 100,000 images a day, of which 10,000 images make it into those 800 to 1,000 articles. So the average story for us has 10 pictures. Okay. In reality, some articles have 2 pictures and some have 30 or 40. But in many cases, these wires, even of the photos, tend to give us a lot of the information that we need.
So flipping the roles from being a publisher to just being a consumer and a reader and somebody who hangs out on your phone, what do you think about the notion of flow? In other words, that you're at different flow states at different points of the day, different days of the week, and so forth, and that notifications have to somehow evolve in order to be responsive to those states that you're in. Does that fit your experience of yourself as a reader?
I think the most successful in that flow state and looking at the state has been things like the Skim, which I'm an advisor to, which actually DMGT is an advisor to. That seems to have filled a niche. People want to wake up in the morning and they want to be sort of caught up on the day's activities, and that tends to be, I think, a proxy almost for getting the newspaper in front of your door in the morning as well too. But other than that, I don't believe there are many cases. I think that most people want to fetch news. They don't want push news.
Well, if you're talking about flow, one thing that kills flow like almost nothing else is ambiguity. It's realizing that, in fact, something about what you're doing is no longer certain, or a message has popped up and you don't know whether or not you have to attend to it. That is actually one of those big distractions. And as it used to be that when we were all on Outlook and email was the primary way that we got stuff, at least it was all in one place. But when you started to get more and more emails, you have 35 unread messages is not particularly helpful because that's ambiguous, right? You don't know if any of them is actually important. And as that got unbundled out into all sorts of different apps and services, this was actually a breath of fresh air because now you could actually separate in your mind, I know that this Gmail message is important and I can check my Facebook later or this and that.
Well, and also, it's also the question of the difference between news and entertainment. Mm-hmm. And actually, Andrew, to your point, where I don't think that there are news stories that people want to know that they're from the source they prefer that they're not finding. I don't think that actually is a problem. What I do believe there to be a problem is there is entertainment that people would want at certain periods of time that they are unable to find or they don't know about. And you see it happen now because I think there's going to be 300 hours of original scripted entertainment produced this year, right? There are so many people that you mentioned, Bloodline 2 or Narcos on Netflix, that have never heard about it, go and watch it the next week and then tell you how awesome it is, right? Or something that's on Prime. I mean, what was the one? Transparent. Like, Transparent was something that took so much word of mouth so long, and it seems like there is a missed opportunity there. It seems like when you get into bed at 9 o'clock and you go to turn on the remote, a push notification at that point, Transparent is what you would love. That is what you should watch now. That seems to me like a missed opportunity because instead people are watching lame sitcoms because they don't know about these other shows.
It's funny. So if we John is waving at me. We should do questions from the audience. Yeah, I'll argue a little bit with.
I know you really want me to say that there are news notifications needed.
No, I'm not sure I'm going to say that actually, but that's because because I think you're absolutely right that news, meaning like journalistically reported accounts of things that are happening around the world, really is something where I've got to go to. And I think most people do, and you go there, and it exercises editorial judgment, and that's why I go there, and it tells me what the big story is. But I do think that there's this much broader story. You can call it entertainment, but it's basically like everything which is not essentially real-time news accounts. That is, a vast ocean of stuff that is accessible to me on my phone. And what I really would like is to have a glass of water. I'd like to have that ocean desalinated, but this much of it.
Yes, I agree with that.
And presented. And so the sort of the challenge for an organization that's trying to, provide a kind of compelling experience around reading and watching, and I hate the word consume, but anyway, consuming stuff on a mobile phone, there is a role for the notifications layer to be sensitive to preferences, time, location. And
it's what everybody calls the discovery problem, which in entertainment and other things I do agree with. I think there's a lot of time wasted reading first chapters of books you're not going to like, playing games that you find frustrating that you're not going to want to play. Whereas the notification, they have enough on me now that they could tell me the game or the book that I'm going to like. But that's as much a curation as a notification thing, I think.
So in this case, what is the job that the notification is actually doing for you?
I think prompting you with the recommendation when you have the free time to consume the media, basically.
Okay, so in the...
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, let's go to the... Yeah, go ahead.
One of the things which I have observed in the media industry is that we don't tend to create the content married to the network. So when blogging came out, they wrote the long pieces as if it was a blog post, and they still do, and they use blogging software and call it a blog. When Twitter came out, the tweets were like some random headlines, and nobody really created tweets for Twitter. I think you talk about notifications. Isn't notification just a great opportunity waiting to happen for media companies to actually create a media unit based on notifications, the 4,000 bytes limit, using that. And we are waiting for the business model to emerge around it, right? Like I said, there's no advertising.
I think you're absolutely right. And when the New York Times launched their Watch app, they called it single sentence stories or something like that. And everybody snickered and said, well, isn't that just a headline? But I actually thought I think that was clever. I think they made the intellectual effort to your point. So yes, I agree with what you said.
And also one of the things which, I think I totally agree with you. Most people who talk about news notifications are people in the news. I think people in the news actually don't use technology, and they think they do. I've run a newsroom, and it was hard to get people to use Twitter. For like 5 years, I was screaming in the wind, use Twitter, and nobody did. And even today, people use it as if it's like marketing and not an extension of their job. I think that's the intellectual challenge we have in the news businesses, where we don't really understand what the notifications are supposed to do.
Well, and the media so dramatically skews the reporting of media, because you've got people that love the topic. It's this mirror thing. And look, I think it did that's what it effectively did to Twitter, which is everybody in the media loved Twitter and was on Twitter. So they thought Twitter was bigger than it was, even though they knew that it wasn't. And it created this, enormous market capitalization disappointment, right? The company and the company thought they were doing better than they were because everybody in the media was loving it until everybody in the media wasn't loving it. So yes, it works both ways, I think.
Can I actually ask you a question to follow this up? So if media itself is moving in onto the notification layer, like you said with the one-sentence stories and the headlines and things, if that actually becomes the unit of media that you're consuming, rather than necessarily maybe taking you to somewhere else, media, especially when it has advertising as its business model behind it, what it craves is attention, right? That's what fuels it. And if the goal then becomes get people's attention onto these notifications, how does that not explode and become problematic?
I think that's the whole point, is not everything is important to everyone. To Dennis's point, you actually have to start listening before you start telling. Media for the longest time, for over 200 years, it's been in the business of telling people what to do, not listening, which is just insane. And I think that's what the change with the interactivity is, that media companies, people who listen are doing really well, right? Like people who adapt to our listening, which is like BuzzFeed, Netflix, they're learning about us and they're creating a better experience. We just don't know it. And the thing is, we shouldn't know it. That's exactly where Foursquare is going. We do not need to know. I think this is where the problem with the media people is that they're thinking news is competing with news. No. News is competing with Dots and Monument Valley and Foursquare and Netflix. I got Netflix running for 5 hours. I'm not paying any attention to any news. The world may end as long as I got my Narcos playing, right? Yeah. I couldn't care. That's what humans do. Once you're in a story, you're in a story. And I think that's the biggest challenge we have, or at least I don't have anymore. But
all right, our time is up. Do I get a one more question? All right.
So
Josh
news used to work on a programmed cycle versus this sort of breaking, interrupt, insertion all the time. We used to get a daily newspaper, and that had a good enough time to gather the stuff from the day before. We used to get, you could watch TV, the TV news at multiple times for the day. Do you think that this sort of interrupt-driven media, and at least the perception of interrupt-driven media, is actually taken it to a place where it's changed the craft in such a way that we're actually missing what it used to be all about? Are we missing that core?
I think there's a huge opportunity in what you said. And look, I may be the only person, I still think the 6:30 news with Brian and then now Lester, I DVR, I think it's a great product. I think there is going to be other opportunities in media. It's not just going to be Netflix, and it's not just going to be breaking kind of constant flow of news or short form video. There's other stuff there, and I've been thinking about it nonstop.
I think the one thing that the media is not understanding about notifications is that it's not so much about what is important as what isn't important. What I filter out, to your point about the nightly news, I don't watch the nightly news because I know already that nothing happened, relatively speaking, and that's because of notifications. And I think that's where the opportunity is, to understand that this is a grid of sentient signals that are sent out that we can absorb through the day using devices, in particular the watch, that's going to allow us to be able to store moments of time where we can absorb media. That's
But Steve, I don't watch nightly because I want to get the news that I would have gotten from my notifications. I watch it because I'm a culture junkie, and I feel like when I watch it, I get a perspective of what is a segment of the world absolutely fixated. It still draws millions of people are watching that.
I'm not disputing that. I mean, I end up watching it every night.
Oh, you do?
Because my wife does.
Yeah.
Okay, but take Brian for example. He's no longer there. Wrong. He's on a network, which is, Meet the Press is now daily. That's an hour a day times 5 plus the Sunday show. How do you absorb that? What you do is you start to be able to refactor that information into the section on Trump. I know. But there are other things. Carly, interesting. I hate her, but she's interesting. You start to make choices, and then you start to create a map that you flow into the amount of time that you have to absorb this information. And I think the media can then turn around and react to that and come up with product that's going to be excessively valuable.
All right, we should end on time, more or less. So
thanks.
Thank you all very much.